In this video, I'm going to show you how to create different line graphs using SPSS's chart builder. Having selected line as the chart type in the gallery, we can see that there are two different types of line graphs available. There's a simple line graph, which is also sometimes referred to as a single line graph, and there's also a multiple line graph, which allows us to display multiple lines on the same graph based on some split set variable. We will start with a simple line graph, and with it, much like a bar chart and pie chart, we have our typical x and y axis. The dataset that we have isn't the best for a line graph since our x-axis in a line graph is typically some sort of time variable. However, I will still portray the ideas behind a line graph by using NCAA division along the x-axis. It is still somewhat ordinal with the transition from Division 1 to Division 2 to Division 3 to the not applicable schools. And like before, we see count has defaulted along the y-axis, and instead of count, I'm going to choose the number of applications received as my y variable. With those set, I can now create the line graph. What we see here is what we might have expected, at least for Division 1, a huge spike in interest in Division 1 schools, many applications, and a very big drop-off for Division 2, 3, and those NA schools. One interesting note is that Division 3 and Division 2 are very similar in their average number of applications, and in fact, the average number of applications for D3 schools are actually slightly higher than D2. Like before, we can double-click to open up the chart editor window, and using chart editor, we can make various changes to this graph. For example, if I double-click on the line itself, it opens up some options for changing the lines. I can change the color of the line, I can change the thickness of the line, so perhaps a slightly thinner line, and notice none of those changes will take effect until I click Apply. I also have the option to change the style of the line. So for example, if I don't want a solid line, I can choose from a variety of different dashed line options. This feature is not commonly used for single or simple line graphs, but it is a good thing to use for multiple line graphs. Much like with the bar chart, when I mentioned creating the different bars with different patterns, the same is true for line graphs. By using different styles, it gives something other than color to help us differentiate the multiple lines. With that said, let's now see how we can go about creating a multiple line graph. Back in Chart Builder, we can drag in the multiple line graph over our simple line graph in the preview, and now we have this multiple line graph of still the NCAA division, but our y variable did actually default back to count, so I will just take the applications received and put those back in so we have the mean number of applications received. What's new about a multiple line chart is the set color, and this is a similar addition to what we saw in the multiple bar chart. For set color, I need to choose another categorical variable to differentiate the lines. In this case, I'll go with two lines, each line representing public and private schools. With that set, I can now click OK to get my multiple line graph. What we see in this graph is similar to the trend we saw before, but we see another trend, which is that private schools generally receive fewer applications than public schools. But in the same instance, we do see a very high discrepancy between Division 1 school applications compared to the others. And in fact, with this view, the difference between D2 and D3 is perhaps a little more pronounced, with us seeing that increase in D3 applications for both public and private schools. So very interesting to note there that there is a spike for D3 compared to D2. In this case, one might hypothesize that after that Division 1 kind of prime competition, then the difference between D2 and D3 may not be as important to athletes at the very least wanting to compete at that highest level. And D3 might have just better programs or more specific programs that receive a higher number of applications. In this case, with a multiple line graph, I mentioned it may be better to not have color as the only differentiator. So we'll open up Chart Builder, and we will go in and change the public school line to be a dashed line. Now, right now, I double-clicked right away, and it has both lines selected. So any change I make will be to both lines. Notice now both lines are dashed lines. So if I want to make a change to a single line, I need to select one of those lines with a second click. And notice I could have done that, or I did do that, with the Properties window still open. So now, with just the public school line selected, I can change the style to a dashed line, apply that, and now there are two things differentiating these lines. There's the dashed versus solid, as well as a color difference. Now, if you're not a fan of this dashed or really more of a dotted line, then we can go back in, single click a second time to select that data, and we can try a different type of line style. Once again, when we are happy with the changes we've made, we can close the chart editor and those changes will be reflected in the output window. At this point, we can copy the graph in the output window and paste it into whatever document we would like. That's where I'll stop for this video. In the next video, we will take a look at scatter plots.